Hello guys, my name is Lars Soonvald and I'm going to talk about Drupal, GraphQL and Angular. We have been developing such a project for a bit under a year, and I would like to share what we have learned and experienced during the process. So I work for Trinidad Wiseman, and we are the first usability company in Estonia. Our areas of activity are UX, user interface design, business and systems analysis, and front-end and back-end development. So I'm the back-end developer for the project. Here's a little view of our concept we have taken. So we are using Drupal 8. And for serving data to front end, we use GraphQL. And here are the pros and cons for we have learned during the process. In my opinion, the best thing about GraphQL is the flexibility, which means that you can choose what you want to fetch, what data you want. So you don't have to get always all the data from the content you are querying, which is, I guess, a really good thing if you would like to manage the data you get. And GraphQL is also good for multiple front ends on the same backend. Then we go back to the flexibility part. As I said, that there is an option you can select what you want to query. And so if you have the same backend and multiple front ends, you can make a different query maps for each one of them, and they can get what they want. A really good thing that comes with the GraphQL module for Drupal is the GraphQL interface, which is like a little GraphQL compiler. You can write queries in there, and it gives you hints and suggestions on what you can use while writing the query. For example, if you're querying a content type, it offers you the fields the content type has. And also, GraphQL has a really good Slack chat, which gives you, I think, pretty accurate and fast answers if you have any questions or problems. And I have used it to give recommendations on what could be done better about it. A little con about GraphQL is that it is beta in Drupal, but I have shown that the recent versions are already release candidates. So it is coming close to being a really finished and good product. And I think another con for the front-end guys is that they sometimes need to know a lot about backend. So how the Drupal's backend works. For example, if you want to query paragraphs or entity reference under the content, then you need to know how you get to it while querying it. So the Drupal side of the project goes so that you need to install the GraphQL module, and this gives you the support for using GraphQL queries. And also a testing interface. I already mentioned the GraphQL interface. And also it supports query map uploading. So if you have finished the query, you can use persist GraphQL to make a JSON file from that query, which means the query gets a unique ID, and you don't. It can be uploaded to Drupal, so the front end can query data from a specific endpoint. And this can be done two ways. You can import manually the GraphQL query maps, And also you can define a path where the Drupal looks where the queries are and then assigns unique IDs to them. And the ID is generated in a way that each time the query changes, it creates a new ID for it. So, for example, it creates a hash from the query itself. So, if someone wants to change the query, it has to be another ID. And while if you want to query for content that has a permission limitation, for example, if you want to query content that only authenticated users can see, then you need to use request headers. For example, the session code can be used. We have also used the JWT token for it. So something about GraphQL itself. In Drupal, it has built-in query types. You can query nodes, paragraphs, taxonomies by its ID or type, and also menus by its name. And it also has many queries, like you can put in the path of the node, and then it gives you the content, what is under its path. Also, variables is a really good way to inject some or to get some custom data from Drupal. For example, you can use filters like when you give in title as a variable, then you can get only the data that has the same title. And they can work like a normal SQL query. If you use like the condition like, then you can, for example, put the % signs from back to end, and this works. So it works like that. You get similar results to it. Also, sorting is a good thing. For example, list views, you can sort data by some fields. In example, if you have a list view of some events and you want to sort them by its date, then you can do it just by using the data that is tied to the node. And for lazy loading, we use limit and offset. So if you put the limit, for example, to 5 and the offset to 0, then you can only get the 5 first results of the query. And the next query, for example, if you put the load more button to the front end and press it, then you can put the limit the same as it was before, which was 5, and then the offset to 5. Then it starts from the next 5 results of the query. And a little weird thing we have so in GraphQL Drupal is the mutations. You can create custom mutations, which means that you can insert or remove data from a content type, for example, but it doesn't have any automatic derivative of the content types built in there like it has with other queries. We don't know the reason of that. Maybe it's because of security reasons that custom mutation or that default mutation will not be created. So people can just use some queries to inject or remove data. And then the custom query types. It has support for writing your own queries. For example, we had some performance issues for showing data on a map, which meant that there were many nodes to be queried at the same time, and then we fetched some data from it. And by using the default node query GraphQL had, it took about over 40 seconds, I guess. So we wrote a custom query which went to Elasticsearch, and we had the data indexed to Elasticsearch. And then we fetched the data from there and gave out the results we got from the Elasticsearch, and it took about under a second. So the Angular part of our project. So Angular gets a query ID. For it, it is created while importing the query maps. And then each query has or doesn't have variables you can use there. So they put in the URL the query ID and the variables they want to use in the same query. And then GraphQL returns a JSON object, which frontend can use to display the data. Also, there is a way that you can query via URL. You can write the custom query in there, but I wouldn't recommend using that because it seems like it isn't that secure, and also the caching isn't really good over there. So here's a little example, the query that front end makes the URL is over there, and then it gets an object like this. Talking about the performance a bit, I created similar REST API endpoints with similar queries, and in comparison to GraphQL, GraphQL was slightly faster. And if I really try to improve the speed of the queries by using Elasticsearch, then the results were really big. And we are experimenting with cache tags, and we are trying to get it to work in the near future, which will improve the performance even more. So now I would like to show you a little example how we write a GraphQL query. Maybe I can take this chair. So here is the GraphQL interface. We use it to write and test our queries before they are turned into query maps and used in front end. So we begin by writing a query, and let me delete this. So if you start here, you can see the queries you can use that are already being derived by GraphQL automatically. And today I would like to show you node query, which is the most typical one. So if we begin, then we can see that it gives an opportunity to filter, sort, use offset or limit. And today I think I will show you how to use the filter first. So once we have written in filter, then we can see that we can use a conjunction. I will write and, which will be nice. And then we can use the conditions. And since we want to have many conditions, we can do an array of it. And now under here we see the conditions array, and I have created an object in there, which means that I can specify, for example, the field I would like to use as a filter. And by a typical node, you have a field called type. For example, if you want to filter the results you get by the content type it has. And here is the value we can give it. So I have created 3 content types to give you a little example of entity reference and its fields it can be queried. So the main content type we are querying is buses. For some reason I have written it with 2 S's. And it has 3 simple fields, color description and max persons. So we would like to filter the type by buses. Yes. And this is now the response part of the GraphQL query, which we can see it can give you the count of the result, which means how many entities you got, and also the entities that have been responded. So we use that. And now, to get a better view what can be used, we can specify what are we going to get from there. So we are going to get no buses. And now we can see that there are many fields we can use under the content type. As we can see, there are fields color, description, and max person as field color and field bus description. We start writing in field. It already recommends you field color, field max persons, and field bus description. Since the field bus description has many values, you have to go inside it, and then you can choose what can be queried from there. So at this point, we need the value. Now let's test the first one. And you can see that there are 3 buses created. Oh, another one good thing will be title to see. So now you can see we have 3 buses, each titled by its number. It has a color, a max persons, and its bus description value. And now we go to the other content types, which are bus drivers. The bus driver's content type has description, gender, and the title is the bus driver's name. And it also has an entity reference, which references to the first content type, which is buses. So we see that the field's name is field bus. And now we just start by writing reverse. And the field's name was bus, so we use it to see which field has an entity reference to the bus. And now we already know that the content type is called bus drivers. We can, entities. And we can specify the content type. And now we can see the fields that the content type has, which is, we're going to use our field gender, bus driver description, the same we had in the bus description, and its title. So now you can see that the first bus has 3 bus drivers that all reference to the bus number 12. And they are automatically added to the return value of the query. And then there are some other drivers on other buses. And the same thing can be done with bus stops. I think I'm not going to show that, because we already saw how the reverse works. And now let's add another filter. I guess that would be nice. So now I can show you how we use variables in the query. You have to define the variables before you start the query, and then you can use it in the conditions, for example, which is a good idea. Then we do another condition. We put in field. For example, if we want to filter out results by the title, we can put in field title and put the value as the title variable. And another good thing to use will be enabled. So this means that the filter is enabled while it's true. And we use the variable title enabled for it. So under here, you can give values to the variables. It already recommends the variables that are used in here. So we put them in an array. And for example, let's get the first bus, which title is number 12. And we put in here number 12 and the title enabled as true. So this will mean that we are going to use the title filter number 12 and that it is enabled. So now we're getting the first bus which has the title. For example, if I write force to here, oh God, then the filter will not be applied and you can get all the buses. And I guess that will be it about the GraphQL query interface. And now I will show you a bit about the project we have been developing and how the queries work over there. So let's take a event list view. And here you can see that there are some events that we have queried from the backend. And there is 5 different queries that go towards the backend. Let's look at the get event list, which is a query that is already imported into Drupal, and we use it to get all the events from Drupal. So here you can see that this is the backend URL. Then we use the query ID, which is the query map ID. And here we can, when we go to the backend, then we can see that the get event list is already imported. And here is a bit more complicated query that we already have written. And there are many variables you can use to filter and really control what you want to get from there. So the URL looks like that. You have the query map ID. The variables go after that. So you can inject them via URL. And then we have the response, which is the same we already looked at in GraphQL interface. And for example, we have this one, which is over here. And here we can see that we have gotten the path of the entity and some important data which is needed for displaying the data in the list view. But this isn't necessarily everything that the event content type has. We only have queried what we need. And to go to the detailed view of this one, we need this one, which is the path. So if we click on that, then we use another query, which is get event single. So we can see that it is formed like the other one, but the only variable you can inject is the path that we have gotten from the list view. And here you can see that we have the get event single query map item. And it is another type of query which I have mentioned before. It is the root query. So you just put in the path, and then you can get the entity from the same path and all the fields you need. And yeah, so this was my little brief example of a GraphQL project we have been working on. And in my opinion, it is a great new technology, but still in development, and I guess it can be a bit more comfortable for the front-end guys. But currently, if the back-end people make the queries for front-end, then it is easy for everyone. Oh, yeah.
Great stuff.